Do you recall, Doctor, that she only agreed to allow Parker and her children into her counseling sessions with Elizabeth Marsh only when Elizabeth Marsh agreed not to discuss gambling in front of the family?
Yes.
During her interview on January 28th, among other things, she said that she didn't want to go to jail. Do you recall that?
I do. This is to the police, is that
Yes,
right?
sir, it is. Yes. And you would agree, would you not, sir, that that reflects that at the time of the interview that she understood that other people would consider her actions wrong and that her actions might lead to her being put in jail or incarcerated in some other way?
No, I wouldn't conclude that. What I would conclude is she knew that police were questioning her, she was in trouble, and she might go to jail.
Isn't it a fact that you don't believe that that statement indicates she understood the wrongfulness of her actions, but you think it reflects at the time during the interview that she does understand that other people will consider her actions wrong and that her actions might lead to her being put in jail or incarcerated in some other way?
Yes.
So in that respect, she had an awareness, did she not, that others in society would view her conduct, the killing of her children, as wrong?
When she was speaking to the police in that interview, yes. And that they would see it and understand it that way.
So at least by the time of the interview at noon on the 28th, within 24 hours of the murders, she understood that although she thought it was still morally right, she acknowledged that society may not think so.
Well, I wouldn't necessarily agree with that. I don't think that she necessarily believed it was morally right when she was giving that interview. I think she was in a very confused state and was not capable of fully recognizing what was happening to her. She seemed unclear about whether the children were dead or not. She talked about hoping that they were, and her expectation of going to heaven together. But I don't think that I would say that she had any clear formed notion that what she did was right, nor do I believe she was aware of its wrongfulness in any full human logical sense at that time. I think she was in a confused state where neither of those were clear to her.
In her spiral notebook, she wrote that, I paraphrase, that she was planning a Saturday massacre, but she wasn't aware there was going to be a 3-day waiting period.
Yes.
Okay. And Mrs. Schenecker was a Russian linguist at one point, isn't that correct?
That's what her job in the military was, yes.
And as a linguist, as you understand it, an individual has to have an expertise in the nuances of language, their meanings, and their usage. Would you not agree?
Yes.
So when Miss Schenecker wrote that she was planning a massacre, she understood and was expressing that she was killing not just herself, but other people. Isn't that correct?
Yes.
I'm going to object. Mr. Approach.
Thank you, sir. Doctor, I found the pages I was futilely looking for a few minutes ago in the USF health records. They're pages 157, 58, 162, 163, 191, and 192 of the USF records. Reference or concerning the questions I asked you about whether it was a delusion for her to have discussed an intent to get impregnated during an upcoming Iowa reunion by an ex-boyfriend. If you would look at those records with a view towards whether they refuse your memory in that regard.
Okay, so I haven't read every word of these, but I think I have a better understanding of the context and recollection of the records and the circumstance. So hopefully I can answer your question.
All right, so without dwelling out too long in this line of questioning, my question to you is, her expression of that plan and with a view towards even stopping medications to facilitate it, do you have an opinion as to whether that's a delusion or evidence of a psychotic thought process?
The diagnosis indicates bipolar I disorder with psychotic features versus schizoaffective disorder of a bipolar type. That diagnosis would indicate that the clinician completing this felt there was a distinct possibility of psychosis occurring at the time of the evaluation. And that would argue that any bizarre or unusual ideas or notions that the patient had may have been psychotic. That's not sufficient for me to reach the conclusion that this idea about getting pregnant was a psychotic delusion. But it certainly raises the possibility of it. I would say I don't know.
Fair enough, sir, but at least the psychiatrists who generated those progress notes didn't interpret it as psychotic symptoms, or they would have not written no psychotic symptoms having been shown or demonstrated by the defendant. Is that correct?
That indeed is what it says here, and that's part of the reason why I would say I don't know.
Okay, sir. Thank you. Would you agree that anyone facing serious criminal charges has the potential motivation to present facts in a way so as to avoid criminal sanctions?
Yes.
It's commonly recognized in forensic psychology and psychiatry, isn't it?
Yes.
On the issue of the defendant having spoken of her children in the present tense during the interview, wouldn't you agree that even normal people without mental illness experience psychological denial because they have difficulty understanding and accepting death of a loved one, and they continue to speak of the loved one in the present tense as if they are still alive?
Yes.
Okay. Between Saturday, when this defendant purchased the firearm, and Thursday, when she killed her children, in her reports to you, she never expressed having any doubts during that time period about going through with her plan. Isn't that correct?
That's correct. She expected to go and pick up the gun and use it.
Ultimately, among other things, you conclude that the defendant's ability to report exactly what she took on the day of the shooting insofar as drugs was poor.
That's correct.
Okay. And you really can't tell us what she took in the way of drugs in the week leading up to the shooting, correct?
That's correct.
As a result of statements made to you by the defendant on January 4th of 2012, you had concluded that the defendant knew that at the time of the killing she had a gun in her hand and that she was shooting the children and that it was a lethal act. Isn't that correct?
Yes.
Okay. This defendant, in your view, was extremely angry at her husband and in fact believed he was a part of the cause of why the killings had to happen. Isn't that correct?
In some very particular sense, yes, it is correct.
At the time of the murders, this defendant understood that the murders of her children was going to hurt Parker Schenecker. Isn't that correct?
Certainly immediately in the time frame, if not at the exact moment, yes.
She expressed to you that she was angry that Parker Schenecker had essentially forced or compelled her into rehab and out of her home. Isn't that correct?
That was one of the things she was angry at him. She was angry at him for years and years for a lot of things.
And years and years and years. It was an intense anger at the time of the homicides, wasn't it?
Yes?
She not only felt anger, she felt betrayed by Parker Schenecker when he, in her view, separated her from her family and her lifestyle. Isn't that correct?
She did. She also felt a number of other very positive feelings toward him. I don't want to misrepresent my answers as indicating that this is all she felt toward him.
No, sir, I didn't ask you about the other ones. I was asking about the anger and betrayal.
Oh, sure.
Thank you. And you don't think you could ever completely exclude the possibility that Julie Schenecker shot the kids to hurt Parker Schenecker?
Could I utterly and completely exclude that possibility? No.
Thank you. And as you indicated, this defendant was angry and disappointed at Parker Schenecker for a long time in a lot of ways for many things. Isn't that right?
Yes.
And you cannot exclude the possibility that some of her motivation in killing the kids may be related to some of the dynamics in her relationship with her husband.
That's correct.
So you can't exclude the possibility that there were motivations in addition to wanting to save her kids or not leave them behind at the time she killed them.
I need to give you an explanation if you want me to respond to that question, because a simple yes or no doesn't give a clear response.
Well, you can't exclude the possibility that exists, that she could have killed the kids as a result of the dynamics of her relationship with a husband.
Oh, I've already answered that. I can't exclude that.
So if you can't exclude that, you can't exclude the possibility there was more going on in her mind at the time of the killings than just a desire not to leave the kids behind or not to say or want to save them.
Well, I can't exclude that, but one of the reasons I can't exclude that is she may have had psychotic beliefs about Parker not taking care of the children, and that was a part of the dynamic. I can't exclude that possibility. There are lots of possibilities that I can't exclude.
She never expressed to you a psychotic belief or a belief in any fashion that Parker was in any form or fashion anything other than an excellent father.
She believed that he wouldn't take care of them or understand them as she did. That doesn't make it psychotic, but she did believe that he was inattentive to them, that he wouldn't be there for them, that they wouldn't be protected and safe with him as the primary parent.
At the time of the killings, in addition to drugs and alcohol roaming around her brain, she was experiencing, among other things, severe and long-standing anger at her husband. Isn't that correct?
Yes?
Thank you. Nothing further.
Dr. Mayer, you mentioned upon being questioned by Mr. Pruner that she did feel anger and betrayal towards her husband. What other things did she feel about her husband that she expressed to you when you interviewed her?
She thought he was a great guy. She thought he would be successful in everything he did. She admired and respected him. She had the belief for years and years that he was wanting and planning to divorce her, where I see no evidence that he ever intended or threatened to do that. She felt rejected by him emotionally, sexually, personally, in a very deep way. She had lots of ideas about him which, in my judgment, were not rational or realistic. Now, that doesn't necessarily make them psychotic, but they were at times out of touch with reality. As I've said, I wouldn't consider the idea that he wanted to divorce her a delusion, but I would consider it a symptom of disordered thinking that was consistent with the thought disorder that we see in psychosis.
In a situation like like you had been referring to earlier in your testimony about her desire to underreport, if you would call it desire, her underreporting. Can you think of other reasons that she might underreport, or were any expressed to you when you evaluated and interviewed our client?
Well, I think I've mentioned some. Doctors not understanding the side effects of her medication, a belief that she could manage her medication better than her doctors, especially when she had new doctors and her doctors weren't familiar with her. A desire to appear strong and capable, a desire to avoid the shame and embarrassment of being a pathetic, stupid person who couldn't manage her own life or make her own decisions. All of those things are specific things that I believe were a part of her inclination to underreport her symptoms.
Did she ever mention to you, or did you take note in any records that you reviewed, that she simply may have just wanted to continue functioning as a mother, be able to interact with her family, and felt that to report and get certain kinds of medication, she perceived there would be a negative benefit to those, and maybe stop her from those duties as a mother and as a family member?
Well, she was certainly at times anxious, even afraid about incarceration, about it being recommended or forced on her. I'm sorry, not incarceration, hospitalization.
Hospitalization.
It being sent involuntarily to a hospital.
There was some comments made earlier in your testimony regarding how you took the statement that she made to police on January the 28th, the noon statement. I believe you listened to the tape or looked at a transcript.
Yes.
Did you have any information available to you that would be consistent with her having been in the process of overdosing or suffering from the effects of the toxic level of lithium and Coumadin in her system at the time of the statement?
The subsequent lithium level is an indication of overdosage, and she made the statement that she took a bunch of pills, so more than just the lithium. Her difficulty with memory, that statement that she makes to police, my understanding of that statement and the character of that statement is such that each individual response to each individual question seems to be logical and make sense. But the statement, the 27 minutes or whatever it is, together, can't possibly fit together. There are many logical contradictions.
Dr. Mayer, there have really been a lot of pieces of information that have been made available to all of us, and I know that you were just, I was asking you a question about the interview that the police conducted of Ms. Schenecker at the Tampa Police Department on January 28th, 2011, and you made reference to 27-minute, and I'm not sure if you understood where I was asking, the basis from which I was asking the question. I'm referring to the police interview of Ms. Schenecker. Are you familiar with that interview?
I am familiar, and I think maybe I can clarify. As I recall now, and I'm reminded, the interview at the hospital, I think, was recorded as 27 minutes. The interview that the police did, I received in 3 separate audio files and then transcripts of those. I was, in fact, thinking of the police interview at whatever it was, 411 Franklin Street or some such address.
Okay, that was what I was asking you about.
And that's what I was referring to, and I think that including the reference to 27 minutes was an inaccurate memory on my part to a different interview.
To avoid confusion, let me try to clarify all of this. My first question to you is, did you become aware, in terms of review of documents here, as to whether or not Ms. Schenecker had toxic levels of both lithium and Coumadin in her system at the time that she was interviewed by the police on January 28th, 2011?
Yes, I did become aware of that as a result of subsequent levels taken at the hospital in a time period that would have meant those drugs were also in her system when she was interviewed by the police.
And that was going to be my next question. Were you also aware that she ended up being hospitalized because of those toxic levels, among other things, of lithium and Coumadin? And you already answered that. Yes, you were.
That's correct.
Okay. My question to you was, is it possible that she was overdosing at the time she gave the statement to the police?
Yes, in fact, she was overdosed.
And my next question regarding that is, what do you take from that in terms of her ability to respond to the police and the type of statement that she gave? You obviously have either listened to it or looked at the transcript of it, or both.
I have, in fact, gone over both multiple times.
Okay. And with respect to her having a toxic level of lithium and Coumadin in her system, in fact, as you say, overdosing at the time of the statement, what do you take from that?
What I take from that is that her statements in the police interview and the illogical nature of some statements as compared to other statements, that is, in isolation, most of her statements seem to make sense. But if you look at various different statements made at different times in that police interview, they don't match up. They're not consistent with each other. They're inconsistent. And what I take from that is that she wasn't thinking clearly. She was unable to think logically and clearly in a consistent manner, and she was responding in a very reflexive, obedient, cooperative state of mind. She was also revealing spontaneously thoughts that came to her mind, some which were rational and connected to other thoughts, and some which were irrational and not connected.
Well, an example that I would ask you about would be her reference to the children in a present tense. And certainly, I think you testified earlier that that is possibly consistent with psychological denial as to their death. Isn't it also possible that she was behaving on the basis of her disorder? Maybe that was the disorder speaking, and she really didn't know that the children were dead.
I think either of those is a distinct possibility.
So both of them would be consistent, and it's possible that either of them could have been true.
I would agree with that, yes.
In a situation like we have with this incident, there's much mention made of alcohol. My question to you is this: are you able to reach an opinion regarding alcohol as a major contributor to this having happened, or any kind of contributor to this having happened, based on what you know from your interviews with Ms. Schenecker, as well as the documents or records that you've reviewed?
Yes, I have some conclusions regarding that.
Would you share them with us?
It's very difficult to say exactly what particular motivation may be the last straw or the final element that changes something from thought or plan to behavior. Having said that, it is very clear to me that alcohol or drugs alone cannot possibly explain or describe her state of mind, her behavior, her circumstances, her statements and actions. On the other hand, the severity of her mental illness may be sufficient to describe it. In the real world of where we live and work and evaluate and treat patients, it's never as clear as one thing did it all and another thing did nothing. And what I would say in this case is this is primarily as a result of the mental health problem, and certainly the drugs and alcohol, both prescription and non-prescription, both the ones taken compliantly and the ones taken non-compliantly, all probably had some negative effect.
But there's no, despite your knowledge of alcohol abuse or pill abuse, the knowledge that you've learned from the interviews with our client and the review of the records, you still conclude that if it's not for the fact that she's mentally ill at the time of this incident, that's the most salient factor in this incident, isn't it correct?
I would certainly say that this event does not occur.
Objection.
They approve.
Mayor, you can continue your answer.
This event does not occur if this woman isn't suffering from a severe mental illness. Alcohol and drugs are insufficient to form the underlying basis of this disturbed behavior.
Dr. Mayer, in the course of your long-term efforts as a psychiatrist, have you developed an awareness of the type of bond that is created between a mother and her children?
Yes?
Or is that type of bond, as strong as it may be, is it something that would be susceptible to someone, to mental illness? Can mental illness override the bond?
Certainly mental illness can very adversely affect the bond between the mother and their children.
And as you said a moment ago, this doesn't happen if it isn't for the mental illness, correct?
Sustained, not leading questions.
And Dr. Mayer, with respect to mental illness and its role in this incident, your conclusion is?
Objection. Repetitive.
May answer the question.
I'm sorry. You'll have to ask the question.
Your opinion regarding the role of mental illness of Ms. Schenecker in this incident having taken place, could you tell us what that is?
She would not have killed her children but for mental illness, the mental illness she suffered. It wouldn't have happened if she wasn't mentally ill.
In your opinion, Dr. Mayer, the mental illness overrides any consideration of noncompliance or alcohol abuse, pill abuse, anything of that nature?
Objection 4.
Sir, not leading questions. You may ask your next question. Sustained.
Do you have an opinion, Dr. Mayer, as to the relative role of the mental illness of Ms. Schenecker as compared to the relative role of pill abuse or alcohol abuse or noncompliance with her medication?
Yes.
Can you share that with us?
Yes. The fundamental problem from a medical and psychiatric point of view here is the terrible and long-standing and chronic and worsening mental illness that this woman had going back at least 10 years, probably 20 years, and getting worse. There were many complications of that. Lack of compliance, lack of family therapy, lack of, presence of alcohol, presence of prescribed opiate medication. All of those things became secondary problems on top of the mental illness. It was the mental illness that contributed to and made possible all those other bad things. You take away the mental illness, these other things aren't there and they don't matter. I'm not saying they don't matter. They're part of the big picture. As a treating psychiatrist, you have to pay attention to everything. But the problem here is the mental illness. It's not whether she's taken her drugs exactly right or not.
Did you uncover any information in the course of your review of the records or in the course of your interviews with anyone, including our client, that would be inconsistent with the mental illness Ms. Schenecker had having been in existence on the day that this happened, at the time this happened?
No, I don't see anything that would suggest she wasn't mentally ill that day.
A few times in the course of your testimony earlier today, Dr. Mayer, you made mention of Ms. Schenecker's intent to take her own life, but also she came to the position that she would take the children with her. My question to you is, does the fact that she had given this some kind of thought in any fashion, such as you had mentioned in your earlier testimony, does this somehow or another make her knowledgeable on the day of the incident?
It doesn't make her knowledgeable, and in fact, people who are psychotic often have repetitive thought patterns, obsessive-compulsive thought patterns. They think about something over and over and over again in a repetitive way, and that thinking about it over and over doesn't make their thinking clearly, doesn't make it more clear, doesn't make it more logical, doesn't make it more rational. In fact, it can lead for it to be even less logical. At one point, she makes a reference to our suicide, or some pronoun that indicates that she's thinking of her and somebody else committing suicide together. That's a part of the repetitive thinking about it, and it certainly didn't make it clearer. Suicide is killing yourself. It's not a mutual thing. This is a part of her confusion and her obsessive thinking about it, which didn't make it clearer or more rational.
And did the obsessive thinking about it or the confusion, did that in any way, shape, or form make her knowledgeable, make her be able to know that what she had done was wrong?
No.
Judge, if I could have just a moment, please.
Yes, sir.
Judge, I have no other questions.
May this witness be excused?
Yes, sir.
Yes, Judge.
Clerk may step down and please go.
Thank you, Your Honor.
15-minute comfort break. As I send you out, I'll remind you of those important instructions. Let's take that break.
All rise.
Drew's exit the courtroom. We'll come back in 15 minutes and continue.